Reading the 19th chapter of the book of Job. Then Job answered, "How long will you torment me and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times you have cast reproach upon me. Are you not ashamed to wrong me? And even if it is true that I have erred, my error remains with me. If indeed you magnify yourselves against me and make my humiliation an argument against me, know then that God has put me in the wrong and closed his net around me. Even when I cry out, 'Vengeance,' I am not answered. I call aloud, but there is no justice. He has walked up my way so that I cannot pass, and he has set darkness upon my paths. He has stripped my glory from me and taken the crown from my head. He breaks me down on every side, and I am gone. He has uprooted my hope like a tree. He has kindled his wrath against me and counts me as his adversary. His troops come on together. They have thrown up siege works against me and encamp around my tent. He has put my family far from me, and my acquaintances are wholly estranged from me. My relatives and my close friends have failed me. The guests in my house have forgotten me. My female servants count me as a stranger. I have become like an alien in their presence. I call to my servants, but he gives me no answer. I must myself plead with him. My breath is repulsive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own family. Even young children despise me when I rise, when they talk against me. My intimate friends abhor me, and those whom I love have turned against me. My bones cling to my skin and to my flesh, and I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. Have pity on me, O you my friends, for the hand of God has touched me. Why do you, like God, pursue me, never satisfied with my flesh? Oh, that my words were written down. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with an iron pen and with lead they were engraved on a rock forever. For I know that my vindicator lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me. If you say, how will we persecute him? And the root of the matter is found in him. Be afraid of the sword, for wrath brings the punishment of the sword, so that you may know there is a judgment. Here ends the reading from the book of Job. May God grant God's blessing this day in our hearing. Amen.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, Lord, my rock and my Redeemer. Here's the stage. It's September 1955, and I am a contestant on the quiz show, The $64,000 Question. I have chosen the topic of religion for my area of expertise, so all the questions to me on the show will be about religion. Seems to be an appropriate area of knowledge for an ordained minister and a reasonably competent chaplain. Of course, in September of 1955, I had just turned 9 years old, but we'll ignore that minor detail. Let's assume, and I know this is a really big assumption, that I was an exceptionally bright child prodigy and cleared seminary and ordination by the tender age of 9. How March. We all, at least most of those of us who are over maybe 70, we remember Hal March, the show's host. Well, Hal gets ready to ask me the first question, which was always worth $64. Now, as a kid watching the $64,000 question, and still an older adult 68 years later, I always thought and still think the greatest pressure was on that first question. The question worth only a measly $64, and not the big $64,000 bonanza question, if you ever got that far. The first question was always something pretty obvious that everybody and the family dog knew. The first question was always something real simple like, point to your nose. I know point to your nose is not a question, but if you couldn't point to your nose, you probably did not understand you were given a command and not asked a question. I mean, if you missed the really big $64,000 question, most other people watching wouldn't know it either, but they would be impressed that you made it that far. Your ego and self-esteem would be intact even if you lost a lot of money. Whew. But if you missed that first one, the $64 question, if you didn't know where your nose was, then, I mean, how humiliated would you be? People would wonder, how did you even find your way to the studio? And I believe you could be assured that there would be no hero's hometown parade welcoming you back to Podunk, Nebraska, or Marlboro, New Jersey. So, on this September evening in 1955, in my imaginary scenario, I am feeling the heat of the moment as Hal opens the first envelope, reads that first obvious question of all obvious questions for the minimum $64. As the audience remains in total silence, and the bright, shearing spotlight shines on this little boy that I was, Hal asks me, how do you spell the word Bible as in Holy Bible? After some deliberating thought for the allotted 30 seconds, I confidently and carefully enunciated my response. B-I-B-L-E. And the audience cheers politely for this 9-year-old ordained minister and boy genius. But suddenly, before my time runs out, I realize I made an obvious error, and capital B, I shout out at the last moment. The moderator joins in the audience exuberance, and Hal shouts, correct, and now on to the next question. Then Hal and I went through the $128 question, on to the $256 and $512 questions. Now we jumped to the $1,000 question. Do you remember the sequence and how we continued doubling until you got to the $64,000 jackpot, assuming you did not make a mistake along the way, which most people did? Along the way, I knew Jesus was baptized by John in the Jordan for $2,000, and Noah's sons' names were Shem, Ham, and Japheth for 8 big ones. The crowd really went wild when I recited the first psalm backwards in Mandarin Chinese for $32,000, enough to buy a house on 5 acres in Poughkeepsie, New York, back in 1955. For any of you who recall this popular game show from the 50s, you know what comes next. The $64,000 question. As per the rules, I was placed in a booth of silence, so the only sound nervous little me could hear was the voice of the program host, Hal March, and of course the thumping of my heart beating in my eardrums. The tension builds as Hal opens the envelope for the $64,000 question on the topic of religion. The host clears his throat, pauses, and says in an ominous voice, "Reverend Dressler, little 3rd grade 9-year-old Reverend Dressler, the program's producer and sponsor, tells me that due to the nature of this question, we will not limit the time you have to consider your response to the normal 30 seconds. Hal continues, and my heart is palpitating almost out of control and out of my chest, and my palms are sweating more than my forehead. Hal says, in fact, the program's producer and sponsors will not require you to answer the question this evening, nor will they require you to come back next week with an answer, nor the following week, nor until such time throughout your life until you believe you have the correct answer. Reverend Dressler, you can have as long as you need. Along the way, you are permitted and even encouraged to consult with as many theologians, philosophers, scientists, and preachers as you wish. You may even consult with your 3rd grade teacher and your mom and dad. You can Google it when Google becomes available in about 50 years, and you can read all the material ever written on the subject. We encourage you to take advantage of all the knowledge ever developed in the history of humankind. Now, Reverend Dressler, Hal says, would you like to hear the $64,000 question? Or would you like to stop here and go home with the $32,000 you have earned thus far? Taking a deep, deep breath, with knees a-knockin', I nod in acceptance and utter a shaky, far less than confident, in my high-pitched little boy voice, "Yes, please, may I have the question?" For $64,000, Reverend Dressler, Hal begins, here is your question. Given that you believe in an infinitely powerful God, a God who knows all there is to know, and a God who is filled with love, mercy, and compassion. How do you explain all the pain and suffering that exists in this world that your God created? Remember, Hal continues, you have the rest of your life to answer this question and are permitted to consult all the resources that have ever existed on the face of the earth to help you. Now, Reverend Dressler, you may leave the booth of silence, go home with your mom and dad, have pizza tonight at Federici's in Freehold, New Jersey, and ponder this question for as long as it takes. Call us when you have an answer. Good luck and Godspeed. Okay, here we are back today, March 5th, 2023, 67 and 1/2 years later. Now, you may wonder, do I have an answer to the question? The question being, if God is loving, merciful, and all-powerful, why is there pain and suffering? Am I ready to call the sponsors of the $64,000 question, give them a call back, and give them my answer? Do I have an answer? Well, simply stated, no. I do not have an answer to that question. At least I do not have an answer that would be universally acceptable to all points of view. I am not in a position, nor do I ever expect to be in a position, to convince every single scientist, theologian, philosopher, third-grade teacher, or game show host why there is pain and suffering in a world created by an omnipotent and loving God. From the Bible, we know this question has been pondered and struggled with, going back at least to the book of Job, written about 25 or 2600 years ago. Writings and discourses on theodicy by Jews, Greeks, Christians, and Eastern religions have graced our planet for thousands of years. I am well aware of the arguments from the free will defense, which gives us the power to do right, or to do wrong, or to do nothing at all. We know that many people over the millenniums have chosen to do unconscionable wrongs with their free will, and have caused pain and suffering, while others have used their free will to do amazing, altruistic good for humankind. There have been many defenders of God over the past centuries, from Augustine in the 4th and 5th centuries to St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, to Leibniz in the 17th and 18th century, to C.S. Lewis and Alvin Plantinga in the 20th century. Great minds, great ideas, but not with answers that would let you cash in on the $64,000 to take to the bank. It would be more than a fair bit presumptuous of me to think I could come up with an irrefutable response to the question of God's goodness in the face of pain and suffering if I had 100 lifetimes. I believe the producers and sponsors of the quiz show, the $64,000 question, knew that they would save that prize money for themselves. But here is what I do know about God's instilling goodness and sacrifice in human creation. Over my lifetime, I have witnessed nurses hugging a nervous patient about to get their first chemo treatment. A teacher bringing in extra food for lunch to share with children that did not even have breakfast. I have seen news accounts of total strangers going into burning homes or crashing through frozen waters to save a life. We can all tune into YouTube to witness heroism during World War II or on the streets of LA. The list of selfless, altruistic acts of courage are endless. Not a perfect answer to all the pain and suffering, not an answer that would win me $64,000, but a peeling back of the page of hope. The hope we have from the one that promises us eternity in exchange for our faith and loving our neighbor. A look into that question that has defied human understanding since humankind first arose. And what is the message that I hope and pray you take with you as you leave our Christian home of worship this morning? Listen to the words of C.S. Lewis from his book, The Problem of Pain. He writes, "I was never fool enough to suppose myself qualified, nor have I never anything to offer my readers except my conviction that when pain is to be borne, a little courage helps more than much knowledge, a little human sympathy more than much courage, and the least tincture of the love of God more than all. Amen."
Break now the bread of life, Savior, to me, as you once broke the loaves beside the sea. Beyond the sacred page, I seek you, Lord. My spirit yearns for you, O living word. Bless now the truth, dear Christ, to me, as you once blessed the bread by Galilee. Then shall all bondage cease, all shackles fall, and I shall find my peace, my all in all. Break now the bread of life, Savior, to me, as you once broke the loaves beside the sea. Beyond the sacred page, I seek you, Lord. My spirit yearns for you, O living word.
And now for the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.